Hello and welcome to a new episode of Clever Together. You're in the right place if you want to become a better communicator and take your career to the next level. And today I have the pleasure of talking to Nola Simon. Now, Nola is based in Ontario. She's a real expert when it comes to hybrid and remote work. She's come from the trenches of financial services, but she's moved on to do much more consultancy. Nola, welcome to the Clever Together podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to see how we can take a random meeting on Twitter and make it into an event. It always makes me laugh. Yeah, it's fun.
We can do that. We're spontaneous bunnies today. I'd like to talk to you first of all about, I found out about you on Twitter, then we got in touch on LinkedIn. I did spot a few things about your dog on Instagram. And, and recently I heard one of your podcast episodes, and your podcast is the Janice Oasis. Now, where did you come up with that name?
Well, I wanted to take a look at, I think you have to look into the past to figure out what's going to happen in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I was taking a look at, what could possibly capture that scenario. And the Roman god Janus is a two-headed Roman god. And so the concept for him is, he's got one eye on the past and one eye to the future. And so I wanted something that was kind of timeless, but also futuristic as well. And Oasis really came from, I wanted it to be considered a safe space where people would feel comfortable talking about different aspects of, what work has always been and what it could be. And just that's the feel that I was trying to capture. So I think the name captures it. But they're actually the first person to ask me.
Oh, well, you see, that's because I'm a curious kind of soul.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, anyway, I was listening to the podcast and there are 10 episodes. So if you are the kind of person who likes to find a podcast and binge listen with 10 episodes, you can do that very easily. And I have to say that when you listen to your podcast, you have a beautifully calm voice. It's so nice to listen to, very relaxing, but also inspiring at the same time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I've actually worked most of my life in customer service and also in sales. And so a lot of my work has actually been voice activated, but it's really just now that I'm finding a platform to really amplify that. And I was telling somebody this morning, I did a video. I much prefer actually doing voiceovers than actually being live on the video.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
In fact, exactly. if you do like that, then Adobe Spark is excellent.
Okay.
Adobe Spark is really fab because you can have all these pictures and then you do the voiceover in very short sections. So although I'm very fluent in English, when I do it in German,
right,
I need a few takes, it's not as easy. So because you're only doing a small bit, you've got a better chance of getting it right without having to do like 18 takes.
Yeah, exactly. But I've had so many compliments actually lately on my voice. And so maybe I missed my calling.
Yeah. Well, you haven't missed your calling because we're not that old.
This is true.
Anyway, so you were talking about sabbaticals, and I love that because here in Germany, whenever I say, oh, why don't you go on a sabbatical? Like I do quite a lot of coaching, and a lot of people, they get to the stage in their career where they haven't really had time out. They might have had a torrent of events like you had, coming at you from all angles, and you're just emotionally exhausted. You just need a break. And I'm not talking about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I'm talking about a real break to have time to really, just think and just work out what you really, really need for you. Not anybody else, not for you as a mother, not for you as a dog owner, not for you as a wife, not for you as a whatever, so-and-so's mum or whatever, but just as you. And I think a sabbatical is a beautiful way to do that. And yet so few people take advantage of it. Why is that? I
agree. Yeah, no, I agree. And it honestly wasn't something I had planned. It actually came out of a layoff. My job was restructured in December of 2020. And so in a weird way, it's only because the pandemic existed
Right.
that I even considered the sabbatical, right? Because what choices do you make? So in the middle of the pandemic, it's like, okay, well, it's actually safer to stay home, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'd never taken a gap year. Like I graduated university, I got a job right away. And
Oh, me too. I was really jealous of all my friends like swanning around the world. But on the other
I
hand,
know.
I was in kind of career bitch mode at that time.
Oh yeah, me too. Like I had a car payment. I had a job within 6 weeks of graduating, right? So,
Yeah.
but other than maternity leave, I had never really taken extensive time off. And I had actually worked myself to the point of burnout where I had a big car accident while I was driving to work one day. I was only working in the city one day a week, massive car accident on that one day. So I changed jobs to be 100% remote. And then I got restructured. And after that, it was just like, I need time.
Yeah.
I need
Well,
to.
good for you for taking the time, because not everybody does. And I think that's very commendable.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in Canada and the US, I think, as you were mentioning, like in Europe, it's more common. Like you were talking about the fact that it was the UK, right?
Yeah.
In financial services in particular, they take a sabbatical where they actually are going away from their regular job, but they're learning something else.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did really was a complete break. I took the time to really, invest in myself. I stopped writing actually on social media for 6 months because I found I had to really find my voice. It's funny. I never thought that I was really a corporate type writer until I didn't have like that context. And then I realized just how stiff some of my writing actually was, right? And it was having that break from learning how to introduce myself and what label are you? Like I was, Keith's wife, I was my girl's mom. So I have a giant golden doodle. So I'm like a dog mom. So how do you introduce yourself? And I actually started introducing myself as a writer because people understand that. And if they're interested in what you're doing, then they'll ask you what you're writing. And if they're not interested in it, they're like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to change subject. But I found it a very interesting process to really kind of step back and go, okay, well, who am I if I'm not introducing myself in the context of who I am to other people?
And I think you're right. I think that people always think, it's only millennials that are finding themselves, or kind of crazy hippies or whatever, but it's not. Our life kind of causes us to rethink our priorities sometimes, and that's totally okay because we're living a long time, right? So you don't have to play the same record again and again and again. You can change. Yeah. So that's interesting what you said as well about language, because I'm also a bit of a corporate chick, and I find that really comes out when I'm trying to write the text for my website, and then I'll show it to someone else and they'll say, Corinne, did you write this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. And they say, oh, this doesn't sound like you. And then a few weeks ago, I remembered when I went for a photo shoot that I used to work for this advertising agency, and I'm in the process of changing my branding and everything. So I thought, I'll ask Paul if he can do it for me. It's Soden and Soden in the UK. And I hadn't been in touch with him for ages. And then he said to me, just, write me a few notes, what it's like. And, we were very friendly before. So I just kind of wrote it like I would if I was speaking to Paul. So, and I'm swearing and blah, blah, blah. And I don't want these kind of, and I was writing in a way that it was like we're in the pub.
Yeah.
And then I read it afterwards and I thought, well, obviously I couldn't be quite that, we say crass, like over the top on my website. But there's certainly a midpoint, that I could maybe go towards that more. I don't have to be so corporate. I can be approachable and, taken seriously. But it's a difficult one to get to, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's amazing how you can actually use language to repel the people who aren't your customers.
Oh, isn't that fantastic? I love that. Yeah,
exactly. There's actually a guy that I follow him on Twitter and LinkedIn. He's a copywriter, but he uses language so powerfully. Actually, the call to action for his newsletter is like, if you are offended by the word that starts with an F, you shouldn't subscribe.
Oh, cool.
Because it's like, okay, well, now I have to hear more because I want to see how creative you really are, right? Because it's going to repel the people who are going to be offended, but it's really going to draw the people who are like, okay, I could probably tolerate it. Let's see how extreme you actually are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Cool. So once you'd had your sabbatical then,
My husband's like, are you ever going to work again?
not if I can help it.
Well, I mean, it's tempting, but
Yeah.
eventually there's a reality.
That's the great thing about having your own business. It doesn't feel like work because you're doing what
Right.
you want to do, with who you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it. Nobody tells me how to, cut back and do a crap job. I can actually give a decent service.
Exactly. That's right. Craft your hours and your client experience, and you're the person
Yeah.
making all the decisions. You don't actually have layers of bureaucracy that is going to take you 10 years
No.
to get things changed. So mind you, all the pressure's on you too, right?
So we talked a little bit about knowledge management, and
Yes.
this is something I get very passionate about. I'm working with quite a few medium-sized but global companies. What they're saying is that, they are having this mass exodus of not just the knowledge as in, write it down, but, the know-how, the savvy, all of that stuff. And that's very difficult to pass on. And especially in the generation where they're used to the knowledge is power mentality, they don't want to just hand it off on a silver plate because they've also spent 20, 30, 40 years learning it, right?
Well, and sometimes you forget how much you actually know. And a lot of it is stuff that you don't even realize is necessarily essential. Sometimes it's knowing who to ask and figuring out the most direct way to get to the answers. That's where the value is, right? And being able to cut through and go like the direct route rather than figuring out and get passed around and email chains and everything like that, right? So that's half
Get on the phone. I mean, you're quite a believer of getting on the telephone and having a proper conversation with somebody as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And I used to actually have a reputation in the office. It's like, I would start with an email, I might text you. And then it's like, if I call you and you don't answer, then I go and sit on your desk. Now that's obviously office centric, not necessarily hybrid remote, but definitely, I personally think that people should pick up the phones more often and embrace like the flexible lifestyle too. Like I'm trying to always convince people to actually get away from screens and do like walking calls. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot of success in convincing people to do it. And part of that, I think, is because they want to have like reference to tools. Like you mentioned knowledge management. It's like at what point do you trust what's actually in your brain versus wanting to document it, wanting to write it down, wanting to make sure that it's captured somewhere on your computer. And there's a balance there, right?
Yeah. Now, I have a walk and talk program actually, and I like to get people away from their desks. And, I mean, LinkedIn has done this, Jobs used to do this. I mean, it's not a new concept. I'm not saying that I came up with it, but it's certainly the way that I learned German. And it's certainly the way that I get my head sorted. Like if I want to get to the root of a problem or I need to find a workaround or something, the chances are if I go for a walk, I'll come up with it. Not because I'm actively thinking about it with every step as I leave the door, but because I've given my brain a break,
Absolutely. Are you familiar with the It Was Never a Dress campaign?
What was that?
It Was Never a Dress?
No.
No? Okay. So it was actually something that was created for International Women's Day. And it was the symbol of the woman for like the women's washroom. And the woman who created it, she co-created it. She went for a walk one day and she just was thinking about common symbols used for women. And then she came back and she actually colored in the sides of the dress with red. And it looks like the woman is wearing a cape. And the whole slogan was, it was never a dress.
Oh, cool.
That came out of a walk. And she's one of the most creative people I know.
Yes, so I get them away from their desk and we go for a walk. We meet in a cafe and I ask them to bring a specific communication challenge with them. Either they've got to have an awkward conversation or they're having a job interview or they're trying to sell an idea or, they've got a keynote speech. It could be anything. It could be anything from like a conversation with one person who's being very, very sensitive about something right up to a whole thing on the stage. They bring that idea, we talk about it over coffee, and then we start walking. And as we walk, I will get them to practice doing different parts of whatever they're going to practice for. And then over coffee, I give them some more kind of specific feedback. And then we have a follow-up on the screen. So they've got all of the tools and all of that stuff, pen and paper and stuff there and then. But on the walk, I'm making notes on my phone as well, and I send them those. So they
That's
get
good.
the best of both worlds, really. It's
exactly, that's right. Yeah. And I think it activates a different part of your brain, right?
Oh, so, definitely. One girl, she said to me, I say girl, she was my age. Dream on, honey. She was my age, and she said to me, oh my goodness, this way of coaching, it's like I'm walking away from all the difficulties and the complexities and the problems and the blockages. I'm just like walking into clarity. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Walking into clarity. Now that's a slogan.
Yeah. Anyway, with knowledge management, how can we capture that? Sure, we could send them on a walk and get them to record themselves. That's also a good way of doing it. And then you could transcribe it and dilly-dally it up. But how else can we do it?
Well, I mean, I think that you want to actually make sure that you're treating people well so that when they're considering actually leaving, they're going to be thinking about that to begin with, right? So I really think it comes down to recognizing and treating your people like they are valuable, and then they're more inclined to make sure that there's a big transition, right? So and it's really even wanting to do like the exit interviews. So many people actually don't even want to do exit interviews because the employer hasn't necessarily taken the time to listen to them throughout their career. How have you been treating your staff up until the point where they actually decide to leave, right? Because if you're not actually making that a priority, then capturing that knowledge as they're about to leave, that's a pretty tall order. Like you said, like people are, they're invested in what they've learned and their effort to do it. So, if that's not being appreciated all the way along, are they really going to make an effort as they're walking at that door?
You've got your head somewhere else by then. You've made up your mind. Right. You're psychologically, you're 3 steps ahead.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, even just like from like a psychological standpoint, right? Like if you've worked for years for a company who hasn't necessarily taken the time to listen to and value your expertise, why wouldn't you want to focus your attention on the new employer that hopefully is going to be able to do that, right? Yeah. So I'd say that the first step in making sure that you have a really good process in place to capture the knowledge that people have and you may lose when they leave, the first step is really making sure that you're treating them well.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Because that's going to make it a much, much better process. I think having an active process to document, I noticed this throughout the pandemic, people have been doing so much on Zoom and Teams, and there's remote chats and whatnot. So a lot of information is actually living within chat. Do you have a process after every meeting to really kind of capture that and put that into a more dedicated knowledge management system? So it's not just going to live in a chat and you've got 400 of them by the end of the month. So do you even know where that information lives?
Yeah, exactly.
What processes are you putting in place to really make sure that it's documented and captured and can be searched? Because that's the other thing. You may know what the title of the meeting is, but you don't necessarily know how it's being indexed, right? So do you have common language? Do you have common processes? Do you have a smart filing system? So if everybody's on the same page and they know what is supposed to happen, are you setting that expectation?
Yeah. And I think that's a valid point that you just said there. Some people like to share their information, for example, in a chat. Other people like to record voice messages. On the other hand, some people hate voice messages with a passion. Yeah. Yep. So you have to be able to give people the opportunity to record the way that is right for them, but also make it accessible for other people in a different format, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that comes down to also, how you learn, how you process information.
Yeah.
It's very individual. Some people need captions, some people don't. Like I'm deaf in one ear. Sometimes it depends on the context, right? So for example, like you're walking.
The accent.
The accent can be a huge part of it too. Is there an accessibility issue for the people who are either recording it or for the people who are actually going to be using it later? All of that is really surrounding like diversity and inclusion, right? You have to really be thoughtful and intentional about how that information is going to be used and how it can be collected.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got treating people well, making sure that there are processes in place for the documentation, but also the sharing of this information. I think knowledge management is hugely important. I was involved in knowledge management when I was still living in the UK, so that was over 20 years ago. And sometimes I look at things and I wonder whether any progress has been made in terms of knowledge management, because it really seems to be very slow and neglected.
I agree. So I used to do this as well too. Maybe 20 years ago, and it was all paper based, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the shift to the digital transformation. But then it's like people keep changing their mind, and it's almost like, you know, they're waiting for the next best tool rather than actually committing to it and getting it documented, right? So, and I think that's where you lose your progress, right? Because it's not like a consistent, intentional process that's embedded into everything that you do, right?
Yeah,
Like
and I think there's also a danger if you're constantly chopping and changing just because some new manager comes in and wants to make a few big points.
right.
People then think, you know what, forget it. I can't be bothered. I've learned 3 different ways.
Absolutely.
I can't be bothered.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the change management process that's going to keep your people engaged in the process? And if you're constantly feeling that you're just repeating steps and it's got no long-term value, it's just going to erode the trust really that you need people to bring to be invested in documenting that for you, right?
Definitely.
I think that's all part of it.
Yeah. I remember they're desperate to keep their key to knowledge and know-how happy, and whilst nobody says no to a pay rise, right, you know, it would all be lovely if we were all earning lots of money, but I think ultimately what it comes down to for most of us is, you know, to remain happy and productive, you want to work for an employer that's A, flexible,
yes,
and B, you know, approachable, you know, appreciative, you know, that kind of thing. I think the other thing people genuinely are craving for is they want decent learning. I'm not talking about these crappy little, you know, e-learning, you know, click-throughs, you know, tick the box. I'm talking about, you know, decent e-learning or decent learning, coaching, facilitation, whatever, that gets you thinking and involved in creating a solution. You know, that is what fires people up, I find. So it's the flexibility, the approachability, and this learn-tasticness, if you like. Oh, new word into the bargain, learn-tasticness. But I ask myself sometimes, why did it take the corona crisis for managers to get over this flexible working?
I don't think they're over it yet, to be quite honest. Well, because there's a lot of push in Canada, in Ontario, for example, to go back to office. The Ontario government has come out and said it has to be 3 days a week. Lots of different employers that I'm hearing of is, you know, we need to see you, right? And they think that they're being flexible by letting people stay home for those 2 days. But the reality is the employees don't feel like that, right? There was actually a campaign that went badly. Property management firm, they designed this welcome back to the office campaign.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
Did you? And the whole premise, do you miss your sweatpants yet? Which was, you know, okay, it's sort of annoying, but the bad one was, I bet your dog misses you. And it was a picture of this really sad dog. And that communication just blew up because people were like, you know, are you trying to make me feel bad? Right? So I don't know that employers have completely embraced the flexibility. And I think that there's a difference in understanding between the employer and the employees about what flexibility actually means.
Yeah, I think at the moment we're working still with workarounds, not solutions.
Right.
You know, to be honest, if you're older, your kids tend to be older, you know, as well. So they don't need this logistics of getting them to kindergarten and all of this stuff. So clearly the people at that age, they don't see the childcare issues. They don't see that a woman has to go to a school, a kindergarten, then she has to come to work, then she has to go shopping on the way home. I mean, they don't see all of this stuff going on around work. All they see is this hopefully fully functioning female, you know, doing her job, get on with it. They don't
Right.
really care about the periphery of the hoops she has to go to actually
Right.
make that happen.
And if they are female, they may have forgotten. And if they're male, they may never have understood that reality of being a female and working. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah.
I mean,
no,
there are many men, don't get me wrong, that do the shopping on the
Yep.
way home and stuff. My husband's fantastic like that. But,
Mhm.
it is a reality that it's work plus, and
Yes.
actually it should be life first, and work should work hand in hand.
Right. Can you integrate your work into your life to make both your work and your life better?
That's right.
That's a question that I ask. Why can't you?
So I wonder what we can do then to make organizations embrace remote working more genuinely. How are you trying to get through to employers?
It really comes down to talking and asking questions, and having them really understand from their staff about what their staff needs, right? So a lot of it, like you said, is based on demographics, right? Do you have a lot of employees who are older? You might decide to craft different policies. But if you are like most companies and you've got a mix that's, tend to be really heavily weighted into people who do have young families, you have to embrace the credibility. So really it comes down to, are you listening to your employees? Are you asking those questions? Are you designing with intention to facilitate what employees want? Or are you coming to all of these meetings with the mindset that you are controlling, you are the boss, you're going to set the policy, and people are just going to have to
Light it or lump it.
Right. Is it like, are you a command and control type of leader? In which case, you're probably not going to be embracing flexibility. If you are, it's under your terms, right? Or are you, more forward thinking? Are you looking at rejigging your tasks and your processes and your procedures to really embed flexibility into the way that you do things, and to really kind of move towards remote, so that you understand that what this is going to look like, not just for now after the pandemic, but like 5-10 years from now. How is that going to make your business be different? How is that going to help you retain staff, attract staff, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just for right now. And it really comes down to asking the right questions and really being open and transparent and willing to try things out. It's an experiment, right? We don't exactly know how everything's going to fully work. And for, like you mentioned, you were working with startups. For startup, it's different, right? Because you come into it, you don't have any kind of fixed rule already. But for a company that's existed for like 50 odd years, or maybe even 100, depending on what company it is, they have to do a lot of unlearning, right? They have rules and processes and procedures for everything. So how do you undo that? And how do you get away from that mindset of, this is the way we've always done it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to be embraced, because I mean, if you think about it, the population is getting older, and the millennials now are going to have to probably be looking after parents, like many of us are now coming up to that stage, but we're living longer, so it's a real thing. So maybe even if you don't have kids, you might have a 5-year respite, and then you might have to think about juggling, looking after your parents and maybe your husband's parents. And
people won't necessarily be retiring either like they used to. Are you going to actually embrace like a portfolio type of career and not necessarily retire when you hit like age 65 or 67, but you're just going to pivot and do something different?
That's right. Because we all know, don't we, that to keep your brain active and to keep your body active, you're more likely to be resilient against things like Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. So it's in your best interest to, work for as long as you can. But of course, it has to be enjoyable to do that.
Right.
Not
exactly.
an endurance test.
Right. And it's almost like, have we given a gift to really have this time to kind of step back and look at the purpose, look at what type of work we want to do going forward into the future, and how we can actually make it different so it's healthier long term for everyone, right? And how does that actually change the like the experience that, Gen Z is going to have, like millennials are going to have, right? Like what boomers have experienced up until now, even Gen X, isn't necessarily going to be the reality of the future, right? So how is work going to change in the future?
Yeah, that's true. Cool. So we've talked a little bit about sabbaticals. We've talked a little bit about knowledge management, and we've talked a little bit about hybrid work, all of which are going to be options to keep your staff keen, motivated, and passing on their information as they go forward. So thank you, Nola, for your time today.
You're quite welcome, Corinne. Thank you.
You can find Nola Simon on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm sure she'd be very keen to hear from you, and I will hear from you next week, same time, same place, at the Clever Together podcast. Be the very best communicator that you can be. Take care now. It's Corinne Wilhelm. Over and out.